All right, Micronauts, in this video, I'm going to draw for you some different prokaryotic cell morphologies or shapes. And yeah. So you may recall that in general, prokaryotic cells can either be simple spheres, cocci, one coccus, many cocci. They can be bacilli, one bacillus, many bacilli, or they can be kind of corkscrew shaped, spiralliform, spiralli. But there are some variations on that theme that are helpful when we're looking under the microscope and can see them. For example, one thing that is very common is to find these spherical shapes or circular shapes in 2 dimensions as cocci in chains, linear chains like this. And this, for example, would be what we see in Streptococcus, like in Streptococcus agalactiae, one species of Streptococcus. We can also find cocci in clusters that are more grape-like. So this would be an example of cocci in clusters. That would be my dog barking at something, if you can hear it. So cocci in clusters, and typically this, the word prefix that we use there would be, instead of strepto, which means like in linear chains, would be staphylo. For example, Staphylococcus aureus, which causes a staph infection. So staphylo, this Greek word, literally means like cluster of grapes. But that's another thing that we can see. Another thing that we can see with cocci is they can be arranged in, it's kind of hard to draw, so I'm just going to kind of hint at how this happens. Now it looks just like a die, but what I'm trying to show here is that we've got cocci arranged in cubes, so sets of 8. And this is something that we see, for example, in a group of methanogens. Or methane producing prokaryotes called Methanosarcina masi. Now, we can also find that bacilli or rods can also form chains, kind of looking like a link of sausages or hot dogs. So this would be an example of bacilli in chains. And this is something we see in, for example, Legionella, Pneumophila, and there's a variation on the theme of bacilli, which is that sometimes they can be kind of more like really exaggerated hot dog shapes. Or what are called comma shapes. And these are vibrios, which are comma-shaped bacilli. And in fact, the name vibrio is the name for one genus of bacteria, which used to be just described based on that morphology. Bulniferous, I think is the name right there. But since then, that genus Vibrio has been broken up. It's been discovered that it's not monophyletic, so it's been broken up. So there's, for example, Alii Vibrio is a new genus, like Alii Vibrio fisheri. Used to be called Vibrio fisheri before it's discovered that it's not the same genus. We'll talk more about Alii Vibrio fisheri later on. It's a very interesting bacterium that is bioluminescent, that has symbiotic relationships with other organisms. Now, you may remember that sometimes it can be kind of corkscrew shaped. And these are your typical spirili. For example, like we see in Campylobacter, jejuni, first isolated from the jejunum, which is part of the intestinal tract, first part. And this is an important pathogenic bacterium, often found with raw and undercooked meat. It's also been found in unpasteurized milk, and there's been increased incidence of Campylobacter infections from that particular source, unpasteurized milk. Now, there's also other kind of corkscrew-shaped bacteria out there, and ones that are kind of more elongate and kind of wriggly. These are called spirochetes. Like, for example, Leptospira interrogans. Spirochetes are more, spirili tend to be more inflexible. Spirochetes tend to be more flexible and more, so these are more like a corkscrew, and these tend to be more springy. Another thing we can see is we can find examples of cells that are branched. For example, Thermoproteus tenax is a bacterial species that can produce these branch cells. We also find that there are some cells that are very long and squiggly and branched. It's kind of hard not to draw them. It's hard to draw them accurately. It's also kind of hard to draw them inaccurately, but they can be filamentous, spaghetti-like. Filamentous is a growth habit that we see in the fungi, which are, of course, a eukaryotic kingdom. But there are some prokaryotes that can also have something like a filamentous habit. For example, Streptomyces source of the antibiotic streptomycin, can appear to be filamentous, like a fungus, but in fact, there used to be a group of bacteria called actinomycetes, which are now called actinobacteria, because actinomyces suggests that they are fungi, when in fact they are not fungi at all. They are actually prokaryotic. They are bacteria. So you might see in older text actinomycetes or actinomyces, but really they should be called actinobacteria. So one more I want to draw for you is we can see examples of bacteria that will kind of form colonial fruiting bodies, similar to what we see in many, many fungi. So here is a fruiting body, such as we might see in Chondromyces crocatus. As an example. So again, this is kind of overlapping with the habit of fungi. Fungi frequently produce filamentous forms, frequently produce fruiting bodies, but there are some prokaryotes that can basically do a similar thing, although the cellular processes that produce these are very different from how they're produced in the fungi, because fungi are true eukaryotes. Okay, that's about enough for me for now.